"Sir, this note was under your plate," the waitress whispered, sliding a crumpled paper toward Gabriel Whitman as crystal glasses clinked around him. He unfolded it with steady hands, only to freeze. "My mom is dying. I have your eyes. Isla." His wine turned bitter in his mouth, the room spinning as a daughter he never knew shattered his perfect world. What would you do in his place? Share your thoughts below. The hum of low conversation floated like silk through the dining room of the French Laundry, where the cream of Napa Valley gathered under pools of warm golden light. Waiters glided like shadows between tables, set with crystal and porcelain, their movements rehearsed to the rhythm of perfection. At a corner table, Gabriel Whitman swirled the deep garnet in his glass, a picture of composure, the very embodiment of success. At 50, his face carried the sharpness of a man who had carved his way through decades of brutal competition, the CEO of Whitman Dynamics, the country's leading logistics and clean energy giant. He knew how to hold a smile without feeling it, how to nod at senators and billionaires while his mind calculated margins and moves that stretched years into the future. The amuse-bouche had just been cleared when something caught his eye. Beneath the empty plate rested a small folded square of paper, creased at the edges as though handled by hesitant fingers. Gabriel frowned, slipping it into his hand with the subtlety of a man accustomed to scrutiny. He unfolded it beneath the tablecloth. The handwriting was uneven, childish, yet deliberate. "My mom said you should know about me before she dies. I have your eyes. Isla. I'm at Harbor Light Children's House, Monterey." A photograph slipped out with the note. A girl, no more than 8, stood before a mural of a lighthouse painted in bright, clumsy strokes. She was unsmiling, steady, her expression far older than her years. And there, unmistakable in her left iris, was the golden crescent that ran like a comet through Gabriel's bloodline. He had it. His sister had it. No one else. His chest tightened as if the room had lost its oxygen. "Everything all right, Mr. Whitman?" The maitre d's voice carried quiet deference, though his eyes flickered with curiosity. Gabriel folded the note once, twice, his fingers unusually unsteady. "I've remembered something I should have done years ago." His chair scraped softly as he rose. As he crossed the room, his gaze found a young waitress who quickly dropped her eyes, her hands twisting at her apron. Gabriel stopped before her. "Did someone give you this?" His tone was controlled, though there was an edge beneath. Her voice tumbled out in a rush. "She came in earlier with the social worker, sir, a little girl. She asked me to hide it under your plate. Said it was the only way you'd notice. I didn't mean to, she just looked like she needed someone to listen." Gabriel's throat burned with a memory. Marina. The name rose unbidden, and with it the image of a woman who painted in wind-whipped courtyards of Santa Fe, who had accused him of living in straight lines because he feared the wildness of circles. Marina, with her impossible laugh and her refusal to compromise. He hadn't seen her in years. And now, this note, a girl's steady eyes, and the word "dying" scrawled like a dagger. He turned to the maitre d'. "Have my car brought around." To the waitress he managed a nod. "Thank you. You did the right thing." The night air struck him sharp and cold as he strode out into the courtyard. The engine of his Tesla purred to life, and he pulled out onto Highway 29, leaving the glow of Yountville behind. Calls from his chief of staff lit the console, but he ignored them. There was only the road unraveling like a dark ribbon through vineyards, pulling him south. Vallejo blurred past, then the steel arc of the Carquinez Bridge. Beyond San Francisco, he cut west, the Pacific opening wide beside him as he pushed down Highway 1. Each mile marker beat against him like a clock running out. By the time he reached Monterey, the stars had lifted high over the ocean, glittering cold and sharp. Harbor Light Children's House stood on a quiet street, A brick building softened by murals and tired toys scattered on the lawn. Gabriel stepped inside his shoes, tapping against linoleum that smelled faintly of disinfectant and crayons. The receptionist looked up, startled, her eyes widening at the sight of a man who seemed carved out of another world. Mr. Whitman. We didn't expect, neither did I. His voice was low, steady. He laid the note on the desk, though he no longer needed to see it to feel its weight. She left this for me. Isla. Where is she? The woman hesitated, then nodded toward the corridor. She's in the music room. The piano's out of tune, but she likes it that way. He moved down the hall, his heartbeat oddly loud in the silence. A soft melody drifted toward him, hesitant notes, then firmer ones, a child's scales exploring the uncertain edges of sound. He stopped at the doorway. On the bench sat a girl with straight blonde hair, her back straight, her shoulders squared in determination. Her fingers pressed the keys with concentration as though each note carried the weight of being correct. Beside her, propped against a backpack stitched with stars, leaned a watercolor of a lighthouse braced against waves. She did not turn when he entered. Instead, she spoke, her voice calm and startlingly assured. When you come into a room, the air feels square. Are you the man from the picture my mom kept? Gabriel swallowed the question, piercing deeper than he expected. I might be. Her hand fell in a chord that wobbled, then steadied. My mom said not to be mad if you never came. But she said if you did, I should ask you something first. Go ahead, he said, his throat dry. Do you make choices with your head, then give them to your heart, or the other way around? For a moment he was speechless. No shareholder had ever asked him a question that mattered this much. Tonight, he said, finally, I let my heart speak first. Only then did she turn, and the golden crescent in her iris caught the dim light like a fire on water. His own reflection stared back at him from eyes too young to be so knowing. Where is your mom? He asked softly. Isla reached for the watercolor and placed it carefully in his hands. In Carmel at hospice. She says the room smells like lemons and old prayers. She falls asleep in the middle of one story and wakes up in the middle of another. A breath shuddered from his chest. Then we'll go. The receptionist hurried up, carrying a stack of papers, her face drawn. Mr. Whitman, there are procedures. I'm not taking her tonight. Gabriel said, his voice firm but kind. I'm taking responsibility. And this painting, if she'll let me. Isla studied him for a long moment, then passed the watercolor to him with hands that did not tremble. You have to bring it back, she said. Otherwise the lighthouse won't stay standing. Deal. He nodded. Outside, the wind carried the salt of the ocean, sharp and alive. Gabriel opened the passenger door. Isla climbed in, buckling herself with a practiced motion that spoke of a child too used to taking care of herself. He settled into the driver's seat, the watercolor balanced between them like a fragile promise. Tell me one thing about her, he asked as he guided the car onto the road. Isla watched the dark ahead. She says, lighthouses don't save ships. They just remind them they're not alone in the water. Gabriel's eyes flicked from the watercolor to the road stretching south toward Carmel. His hands tightened on the wheel. Then, let's remind her, he said, and pressed down on the accelerator, the night opening before them like a story that had waited too long to be told. The hospice stood at the edge of Carmel, its whitewashed walls softened by bougainvillea that clung stubbornly against the sea wind. Gabriel had parked the car under the shadow of a cypress tree, the lighthouse watercolor propped in the back seat, and walked with Isla through the double doors that opened to a quiet hallway. The air was sharp with lemon disinfectant, yet there was a faint undertone of lavender that clung to the curtains as if someone had tried to make this place gentle. Nurses moved softly, their shoes whispering against linoleum, their eyes carrying the practiced kindness of those who have watched more goodbyes than most. Isla led the way, her hand tucked into the strap of her backpack. She moved with a self-possession far beyond her 8 years, though Gabriel noticed the small tremor in her fingers when she reached for the handle of a half-open door. Inside the room was a wash in late afternoon light, and on the bed lay Marina, her hair, once a cascade of wild gold that had defied combs and conventions, now thinned across a pillow. Her cheeks had hollowed, but when her eyes fluttered open they held the same unshakable brightness he remembered from years ago in Santa Fe. She smiled faintly when she saw Isla, and then stopped her gaze, shifting to the tall figure behind her daughter. Gabriel. Her voice was barely more than a breath, but it carried the same cadence, a rhythm of certainty. I wondered if you'd find her. The words sliced through him. You should have told me, he said, quietly, moving closer, though he was careful not to jar the fragile calm of the room. Marina reached for Isla's hand and brought it to her chest. You were building your empire. I couldn't ask you to split yourself in two. But I told her you'd come one day, didn't I? Isla? The girl nodded, her expression unreadable. She stood between them, the golden crescent in her eye, glowing in the sunlight, like a mark of truth. Gabriel knelt to her level, uncertain of how to speak. I didn't know about you. He admitted the words heavy foreign. But if I had... He stopped, unable to finish. Regret was a language he was only beginning to learn. Isla tilted her head. Mom said you make choices with your head. She said you'd come when your heart finally got a turn. Gabriel met her gaze, and for the first time in decades he let himself feel the crack in his composure. She was right. The nurse returned with a clipboard, her expression apologetic. Mr. Whitman, there are forms. Ms. Navarro left instructions naming you, though she never contacted you directly. It's all here. She set the folder on the table. We'll need legal steps, but she made sure we knew where to find you. Marina smiled faintly, her eyes closing again. You have her now. She's been braver than she should have had to be. Silence filled the room. The steady beep of the monitor, the faint rustle of the curtain in the sea breeze. Gabriel sat by the bed, his hands clasped tightly as Isla leaned forward, whispering something only her mother could hear. When Marina's breathing steadied into shallow sleep, Isla looked back at him. Are you taking me away tonight? She asked. Gabriel shook his head. Not yet, but soon. I want to do this right. She considered this answer, then sat cross-legged on the chair beside her mother's bed, as though she had done so many times before. Gabriel watched her small frame, the way she carried herself with quiet discipline, and wondered how many nights she had waited alone in orphanage halls, how many questions she had folded into silence. Later, when Marina had drifted into a deeper sleep, Gabriel took Isla out to the garden. The ocean stretched beyond the hedges, restless and endless. She perched on the low wall, her legs swinging the straps of her backpack, frayed. Do you like the ocean? He asked. She shrugged. It doesn't care if you're sad. It just keeps moving. Mom said it helps remind us we can too. He smiled faintly at the wisdom threaded through her words. He remembered Marina saying something almost identical when storms had rattled the desert windows of their old apartment. Always searching for metaphors, always finding lessons in what others ignored. Isla had inherited more than her eyes. Back in the car, she pulled out a worn sketchbook from her bag and placed it in his lap. This is where I keep the things I don't want to forget, she said simply. Pages of watercolors fluttered beneath his hands. The hospice garden, the cracked sidewalk in front of Harbor Light, the face of a nurse with kind eyes, and lighthouses, always lighthouses, each painted with different skies and seas. Why so many lighthouses, he asked. Because they stand still, but still help people move, she said, as if it were obvious. Mom said that's what love is supposed to be. The words pressed against him with the weight of revelation. He had built his entire life on motion deals, flights, strategies, and yet here was an 8-year-old teaching him about stillness. That night he booked a small hotel nearby. Isla refused the offer of a separate room and settled with her sketchbook by the window, watching the waves as if waiting for them to carry her mother's breath across the shore. Gabriel sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the watercolor she had handed him earlier. The lighthouse tilted slightly in the painting, as though resisting a storm. It struck him as more than art. It was a message, fragile, stubborn, luminous. The following morning, Marina's condition worsened. A doctor explained in hushed tones that the cancer had advanced too far, that her body was surrendering. Isla stood beside her bed, her small hand wrapped around her mother's whispering words Gabriel couldn't hear. When Marina's eyes fluttered open once more, she looked straight at him. "Promise me," she said, her voice faint but steady. "Don't just protect her, choose her. Every day, even when it's hard." Gabriel swallowed his throat tight. "I promise." A flicker of relief softened her expression. Her gaze shifted back to Isla. "You'll remind him," she murmured, and then her breath grew shallow, the monitor slowing to a rhythm that sounded almost like a lullaby. Isla pressed her forehead against her mother's hand. Gabriel stood by, helpless, feeling the moment stretch into permanence. When the final stillness came, it was quiet like a candle going out in a room already dark. Afterward, Isla walked out into the garden without tears clutching her sketchbook. Gabriel followed, unsure whether to speak. She opened the book to a blank page and began painting quickly, fiercely, the brush strokes sharp with urgency. Within minutes, a lighthouse rose against a stormlight spilling from its top in golden arcs. She looked up at him, her face pale, but her eyes unflinching. "This one's for her," she said, "but you have to keep it safe." He nodded, unable to speak. She tore the page, carefully placed it in his hands, and returned to painting another. This time, she drew 2 figures small, side by side, walking toward the sea. When she set the brush down, she said quietly, "Mom said you'd come when you were ready. I think she was right." Gabriel folded the pages with care, his chest heavy with grief and a strange, unexpected gratitude. He looked at Isla, at the strength packed into her slight frame, and knew his life had shifted. His world of schedules and empires had cracked open, and in the space left behind stood a girl with lighthouse eyes guiding him toward a horizon he had never imagined. Gabriel's home in Sausalito stood like a polished sculpture overlooking the Golden Gate. The glass walls caught the morning light, the Pacific stretching wide and indifferent beneath, while every corner of the house gleamed with order. It was the kind of place designed for control, for schedules, and precision, not for the unpredictable presence of a child. Yet, when Isla stepped through the front door, her small shoes tapping against the marble floor, the entire space seemed to shift. She paused in the foyer, her backpack dangling from one shoulder, her eyes traveling from the abstract steel sculpture to the immaculate white sofa, then to the massive windows where the bridge carved itself against the horizon. "It looks like no one lives here," she said, her voice soft but steady. Gabriel followed her gaze, and for the first time saw what she saw. The place wasn't a home, it was a museum of achievement, a shrine to success. No photographs, no traces of warmth, only lines, angles, and silence. "You're right," he admitted, his words quieter than he expected. "We'll change that." The first change came unexpectedly. At breakfast, he burned pancakes. Isla laughed not cruelly, but with the ease of someone who hadn't laughed in a long time. He stared at the ruined batter, then at her brightened face, and without thinking declared no meetings before breakfast. Ever again. Within hours, his assistant Rebecca was fielding confused calls from directors who had never known him to prioritize anything over the company calendar. The following weekend, Isla tugged him by the hand to the ferry building market. He hadn't been there in years, not since early acquisitions had swallowed his time whole. Vendors called out with easy cheer, the air thick with the scent of sourdough and roasted coffee. Isla darted from stall to stall, asking questions about honeybees' ocean salt and the resilience of sour cherries in winter. Gabriel trailed behind, listening, as farmers and artisans answered her with patient delight. Watching her, he realized she was interviewing the world the way reporters questioned him, only her questions carried no agenda. She wanted to know because knowing was enough. That night she taped sticky notes around the kitchen. Little squares of color fluttered on the refrigerator on the pantry door even above the sink. Each note carried a wish written in her rounded script. Teach me how to make spaghetti. Let's draw the bridge. Read a story before bed. None of the wishes mentioned toys or things. They were about moments' time carved out of the rhythm of his empire. He left them there, promising silently to answer each one. Slowly, the sterile house began to bend toward her presence. She set up a watercolor corner in the sunroom, brushes rinsing in jars that caught the light like stained glass. A donation bin appeared near the back door, where she convinced Gabriel's staff to collect supplies for families she had met through Harbor Light. Her sketches began to populate the refrigerator, then the hallway walls, small bursts of color breaking the monochrome. What had once been silent now hummed with life, reshaped by a girl who had learned how to claim space without demanding it. But the outside world had sharp edges. A business blog caught sight of them during one of their market visits, splashing a photograph of Gabriel holding Isla's hand across its homepage. The headline read, "The Secret Heir of Whitman Dynamics." By the next morning, reporters were camped at the edge of the driveway, long lenses trained on the glass facade. At school, the whispers began. Isla returned home one afternoon, her shoulders stiff, her jaw set tight. She set her backpack down without a word. When Gabriel asked, she said only, "Some kids said you didn't want me until Mom died." Her voice was flat, but her hands trembled as she unzipped her bag. Gabriel crouched beside her. "That's not true," he said, his voice firm. "I didn't know about you. If I had, things would have been different." She looked at him, eyes searching as if testing the strength of his words. Then she nodded, once the smallest gesture of belief, and turned to unpack her books. He watched her carefully arrange her pencils by color, a quiet ritual that steadied her in ways he was only beginning to understand. Behind the walls of his home, Gabriel felt the clash of two worlds. In one, board members demanded his presence at late-night calls, investors dissected quarterly growth, and headlines questioned his stability. In the other, a girl with paint-stained fingers transformed sterile rooms into a home, asking nothing more than that he show up, listen, and choose her. One evening, as the sun dropped behind the bridge, Gabriel stood in the living room, his tie loosened, papers scattered on the coffee table. Isla knelt on the floor nearby, coloring a lighthouse with streaks of violet and gold. He watched her, realizing the collision was no longer between two worlds, it was inside him. The man who had once measured life in market shares was beginning to measure it in moments, and for the first time, he was uncertain which one scared him more, the risk of losing the empire he had built, or the risk of failing the daughter who had quietly rebuilt him. The storm broke first in the boardroom. Whitman Dynamics had negotiated for months toward a historic merger with a Seattle-based energy firm, a deal that would secure their dominance on the West Coast and beyond. The closing required Gabriel's presence for 3 uninterrupted weeks in Seattle. Numbers were polished, presentations flawless, but as the CFO laid out the timeline, Gabriel's thoughts snagged on a single date. Isla's school art show fell in the middle of that window. She had mentioned it only once with careful detachment as if bracing for disappointment. The painting chosen for display was of a lighthouse, she had said, and then quickly changed the subject. The board chairman, Walter Hargrove, leaned forward. "We'll need you on the ground Monday, Gabriel. The transition requires leadership that can't be phoned in." Gabriel's jaw tightened. "I'll need 24 hours to confirm." The words startled even him. He had never deferred a decision in his career. A ripple of unease passed around the table. Richard Blackwell, the most aggressive director, broke the silence. "Your priorities seem altered, Gabriel. This company was built on your singular focus. Don't lose it now." He didn't answer. That night, he stood in the doorway of Isla's room. She was sprawled on the floor. Watercolors spread in a semicircle around her, the smell of paint fresh in the air. The lighthouse on her desk stood tall against an angry sea, its beam cutting through the storm. He realized she had painted not just a structure but a metaphor. He sat on the edge of her bed. "Tell me about this one," he asked. Isla hesitated, then said, "It's supposed to be strong even when the waves hit, but sometimes I think the waves are stronger." She didn't look up from the page. Gabriel felt the words land like a verdict. The waves were his world, the board, the investors, the constant pull of power. She was asking if he could stand firm. He reached out, resting a hand on the corner of the paper. "Your painting matters more to me than any meeting." She searched his face for cracks, and though she said nothing, he could see the hope she was trying not to hold. 2 days later, the storm took another form. A man appeared at his office, Elias Navarro Marina's brother. His suit was pressed, his expression cold. He carried documents prepared with unsettling efficiency. "I've filed for custody of Isla," he said without preamble. "Our family has the stability and structure she needs. You're a businessman, not a father." Gabriel's lawyer flipped through the petition, his expression grim. Elias had gathered evidence, Gabriel's travel schedule, media scrutiny, even the tension in the boardroom. "The courts will favor blood relatives with proven stability," Elias continued. "You can't erase the fact that you ignored her existence for 8 years. Gabriel's voice remained level, though his pulse hammered. "You weren't there when Marina was dying. You weren't there when Isla cried in the night and had no one to hold her. I may be late, but I'm here now, and I'm not leaving." After Elias left, Gabriel lingered in the office long after dark. The lighthouse painting leaned against the wall, watching him. For once, he closed his laptop and picked up the brush Isla had left on his desk earlier that evening. He added a faint beam of yellow across the waves, imperfect but deliberate. The act felt like a vow. At the custody hearing, the battle lines were drawn. Elias's lawyer painted a portrait of a child in chaos, tethered to a man whose empire demanded everything. But when Gabriel took the stand, he abandoned the script his attorneys had prepared. He spoke not as a CEO, but as a father. "I've closed billion-dollar deals. I've built systems that move goods across continents. But none of it matters compared to the choice I make every morning now, the choice to show up for my daughter. Parenting isn't about perfection. It's about presence. I failed Marina. I will not fail Isla." The judge's expression softened, though no ruling was given that day. Outside the courthouse, Isla slipped her small hand into his, her grip fierce. "Are you scared?" she asked. "Yes," Gabriel admitted. "But I'm more scared of you thinking I'd ever give up on you." That night, they drove out to Pigeon Point Lighthouse, the real one that had inspired her painting. The beam cut through the fog, steady, unshaken by the stormy sea. Isla leaned against the railing, her hair whipping in the wind. "Are you choosing me because it's right?" she asked, her voice nearly lost in the roar of the waves, "or because you're afraid to be alone?" Gabriel turned toward her, the salt air stinging his eyes. I'm choosing you because you're my daughter, and because for the first time I know what matters." She held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded, the storm's spray catching in her lashes. The lighthouse stood behind them, its light sweeping the darkness, a reminder of what endures when the waves keep coming. The morning of the verdict arrived wrapped in a fog that clung to the courthouse steps. Gabriel walked in with Isla beside him, her hand wrapped tightly around his, her other arm cradling the sketchbook she never seemed to let go of. The hearing had dragged on for weeks, every session a battle of words and evidence of Elias Navarro presenting charts of Gabriel's corporate obligations, and lawyers insisting stability meant tradition. But today was different. Today, Judge Martinez would decide where Isla would live, where her story would continue. When the judge spoke, her voice was measured but clear. "This court recognizes the commitment Mr. Whitman has demonstrated since becoming aware of his daughter. The child has expressed her wish to remain with him, and the evidence shows he has begun making significant adjustments to ensure her well-being. Custody is awarded to Mr. Whitman." Gasps rippled through the gallery, but Gabriel barely heard them. He turned to Isla, whose eyes shimmered, though no tears fell. She simply whispered, "We get to go home." He nodded, his voice caught in his throat. "Yes, we get to go home." Back in Sausalito, home no longer looked the same. The sterile glass walls now carried drawings in bright crayon paintings drying on easels, and a corkboard filled with school notices. The once quiet kitchen smelled of blueberry pancakes on Saturdays, and spaghetti sauce simmering on weeknights. Gabriel had traded evening strategy sessions for helping Isla memorize multiplication tables, and conference calls for listening to her stories about the characters in her books. The empire still hummed beyond those walls, but it no longer dictated the rhythm of his days. The board had not been pleased when he announced his restructuring. He stepped down from the role of CEO, keeping only the chairmanship and trusting day-to-day operations to Rebecca, who had proved steady and unflinching during the storm. "You're walking away from power," Richard Blackwell had accused in that final tense meeting. Gabriel had answered simply, "I'm walking towards something greater." For the first time, his words were not strategy, they were truth. Life with Isla unfolded not in grand gestures, but in daily choices. The choice to sit with her through another nightmare, to let her fall asleep, with his hand still wrapped around hers. The choice to show up at her soccer game, standing on the sidelines in the rain while other parents nudged each other, whispering about the billionaire in muddy shoes. The choice to hang her lighthouse painting in the living room right above the fireplace, where any guest would see it before they noticed the awards on the shelves. One evening, Isla handed him a folded page from her sketchbook. It was another family tree, but this one was different. At the top, Marina's name bloomed with watercolor flowers. Beneath, 2 branches stretched down, connecting him and Isla together. Across the bottom, she had written in her uneven script, "Family is a choice you make every day." Gabriel framed it the next morning and placed it in his office right where his old diplomas used to hang. Investors who visited raised eyebrows, but he didn't bother to explain. The drawing spoke louder than any chart or figure. They celebrated Marina's birthday months later by driving to Sedona, a place she had loved for its red rocks and wide skies. Isla brought along her paints, setting up her easel on the edge of a canyon. Gabriel watched as she mixed colors with the same precision Marina once had, coaxing the desert onto the page. "Do you miss her, Isla?" asked suddenly, her brush pausing in midair. "Every day," Gabriel answered, "but I think she's here in you, in the way you see the world." Isla studied the canyon, then added a bright beam of yellow cutting across her canvas. "Then we'll keep her light." On the drive back, they stopped at Baker Beach in San Francisco. The sun was setting, the bridge glowing like a promise in the distance. Isla ran to the water's edge, her laughter carrying above the surf. Gabriel followed more slowly, his shoes sinking into the wet sand. When she turned back toward him, hair tangled by the wind eyes lit with that golden crescent, he felt something settle inside him. The empire he had built would one day fade towers, sold contracts forgotten. But the girl calling his name against the roar of the ocean that was forever. That night, as they stood on the balcony of their home city lights, flickering in the distance, Isla slipped her hand into his. "Do you ever miss your old life?" she asked. Gabriel considered the question. He thought of late nights filled with nothing but screens of mornings where the first sound he heard was an email notification. He thought of the relentless climb, the hollow victories, the solitude masked by success. Then he looked at Isla. "No," he said simply. "I was surviving before. Now I'm living." She leaned her head against his arm, and they stood in silence, the beam of her lighthouse painting watching over them from the wall inside. In that moment, Gabriel understood what Marina had asked of him in her final days. Not to protect Isla as though she were fragile, but to choose her actively, daily, fiercely. And as the night wrapped itself around them, he knew he would spend the rest of his life keeping that promise. Gabriel Whitman's life had been defined by precision control and relentless ambition. From the gleaming boardrooms of San Francisco to the quiet minimalist halls of his Sausalito home, he had built a world where nothing was left to chance. Yet all of it, every deal, every tower, every headline had unraveled the moment a waitress slipped him a folded note at a restaurant. The words, written in a child's uncertain hand, "My mom is dying. I have your eyes," forced him to confront a truth he had never prepared for. He was a father, and he was already late. The journey that followed tore him between two worlds. On one side, the storm of corporate expectations, shareholders who demanded his absolute devotion, and family members who sought to pull Isla into their orbit of control. On the other side, an 8-year-old girl who had survived grief far beyond her years, who painted lighthouses as symbols of resilience, and who asked not for riches but for presence. Gabriel had faced every challenge life could throw at a businessman, but nothing compared to the moment Isla asked him, "Are you choosing me because it's right, or because you're afraid to be alone?" Each step forward became a choice. To sit with her nightmares instead of silencing his phone. To hang her drawings in his living room instead of another award. To risk the wrath of his board by missing a high-stakes trip for the sake of attending her school art show. And when Marina's brother tried to take her away, Gabriel discovered that fatherhood was not about biology alone, but about standing and fighting for a child, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. The courtroom battle ended with a verdict that gave him custody, but the true victory was quieter. It was found in the mornings where pancakes replaced meetings and evenings when laughter echoed across glass walls that once knew only silence in a family tree. Isla painted where his name sat next to hers beneath Marina's memory. For a man who once measured his worth in billions, Gabriel discovered that the greatest wealth was not counted in shares or profits, but in the small hand that reached for his each night before sleep. His life did not return to its old rhythm. It became something better, messier, louder, more uncertain, yet infinitely more alive. Gabriel chose every day to be not just a CEO, but a father, a presence, a lighthouse standing firm against the waves. And in that choice, he finally understood the lesson Marina had whispered in her final days: love isn't found in grand gestures, but in daily decisions. For us, watching this story unfold, the lesson is clear. In a world that constantly demands our attention through work, ambition, and endless distraction, what truly matters is where we choose to stand firm. Family love and presence cannot be postponed for tomorrow. They are built in the choices we make today to listen, to show up, to hold on even when storms rise. Gabriel's journey reminds us that redemption is possible, that it is never too late to turn and choose what matters most. If this story moved you, let it be more than a story. Let it be a mirror. Ask yourself who in your life is waiting for you to choose them today. Thank you for watching and sharing this moment with us. If you believe in the power of stories to heal, inspire, and remind us of what truly matters, we invite you to subscribe to our channel. Your support gives us the strength to continue bringing you meaningful stories that touch the heart and light the way forward. Together, let's keep building a community where love and family are always chosen every single day.